All in all, was being in the Stones a great gig or was it hell?
It was both heaven and hell, roller coaster ride. No, but seriously, it was mostly a lot of fun. There were a lot of people around the Stones that seemed to drag them down and hold them back. Certain people's addiction to drugs didn't help.
Every legendary band has a story it loves to tell, and another one it quietly steps around. When people talk about the Rolling Stones, the same names appear again and again. The swaggering frontman, the outlaw riffmaker, the faces that became symbols. But buried inside the band's greatest era is a guitarist whose presence reshaped everything and yet rarely gets celebrated the way he should. It's not because he lacked impact. It's because his impact changed the balance. This guitarist didn't arrive with chaos or scandal. He arrived with precision, with restraint, with a musical intelligence that subtly shifted what the band was capable of doing. Almost overnight, the Stones sounded deeper, looser, more adventurous. And that's where the problem began. Because bands aren't just collections of talent, they are hierarchies, ecosystems, carefully protected power structures. And when someone enters who elevates the music without fitting the existing mythology, tension follows. This is the story of a guitarist who helped create what many fans still consider the Stones' greatest music, and then walked away by choice. No firing, no explosion, just a quiet exit that stunned everyone. But his story is only half of what the band prefers not to revisit. Because after he left, another guitarist stepped into the shadows, someone who nearly joined the band, left fingerprints all over a classic album, and then vanished from the narrative almost entirely. Two guitarists, two disappearances, and one band that never quite knew how to talk about either of them. Before we continue, if you love the stories of Mick Jagger and Rolling Stones and want to help keep his legacy alive, subscribe to this channel, like, and share. The late 1960s were not a victory lap for the Rolling Stones. They were a survival test. Behind the confidence and controversy, the band was unraveling. One founding member was spiraling out of control, barely able to function. Rehearsals became unpredictable, studio time turned fragile, and the unspoken question hovered over every session: how long can this last? When the break finally came, it wasn't dramatic, it was inevitable. Suddenly, the Stones faced a reality they had never truly prepared for. They were losing a core piece of their identity, not just a guitarist, but a founding presence. And replacing that wasn't about filling a slot, it was about saving the band itself. The stakes were enormous. Without the right replacement, the Stones risked becoming a legacy act before their time. Tours, albums, momentum, all of it depended on one decision made under intense pressure. What they needed wasn't just competence. They needed someone who could evolve them. And that's when a quiet figure entered the room. Young, soft-spoken, almost invisible next to the band's towering personalities. No bravado, no attitude, just a guitar and an instinctive understanding of the music. At first, it didn't feel revolutionary. Then he played, and everything changed. The difference was immediate and unsettling. Where the Stones once relied on grit and repetition, this new guitarist introduced space. Where riffs once drove the songs forward, melodies now floated above them. The band didn't just sound tighter, they sounded expanded. It wasn't flashy, it was dangerous in a quieter way. Solos began to tell stories. Songs stretched beyond their original frames. What had once been raw rhythm and blues evolved into something more fluid, more emotional, more ambitious. Audiences felt it instantly. Live performances grew longer, riskier, more dramatic. Studio recordings gained depth and complexity that the band had never fully explored before. The Stones weren't just surviving the transition, they were entering what many would later call their creative peak. But inside the band, that transformation came at a cost. Because this guitarist didn't just support the music, he shaped it. He influenced arrangements. He contributed ideas that became essential to some of the band's most celebrated songs. And yet, when the records came out, his name rarely appeared where it mattered most. No writing credits, no formal acknowledgement. The music carried his voice, but the story didn't. At first, it was easy to ignore. The stages were big. The success was overwhelming. But slowly, something began to fracture. The very talent that elevated the band was quietly isolating the man who provided it. And that tension was only beginning. At first, the imbalance was subtle. Compliments were given, smiles exchanged, On stage, everything still worked, but behind the scenes, something had shifted. The band no longer felt like a closed circle. There was now a musician whose influence extended beyond his position, and that made people uneasy. The Rolling Stones had always operated on an unspoken rule. Creativity flowed through a very specific channel. Songs might be shaped collectively, but ownership remained tightly guarded. That structure had kept the band stable for years. This guitarist disrupted that balance without trying to. Ideas emerged naturally during rehearsals. Musical directions changed mid-song. Solos redefined arrangements. And slowly, it became clear that the band's most exciting moments were no longer coming from the usual places. That's when admiration turned complicated. Being too good inside a band like the Stones was risky. Virtuosity drew attention. Musical sophistication shifted focus. And focus, in a group built on image and hierarchy, is power. The guitarist sensed it. He wasn't confrontational. He didn't demand recognition. But silence has weight, especially when contribution goes unacknowledged. Each album cycle reinforced the same message. His playing mattered, his voice, officially, did not. Over time, the joy of creation was replaced by distance. He began to feel less like a collaborator and more like a tool, essential but replaceable, trusted on stage but sidelined in decisions that shaped the band's future. And once that realization set in, staying became harder than leaving. When the decision finally came, it shocked everyone. Not because the band was falling apart, but because it wasn't. Success was everywhere. Tours were massive. Albums were celebrated. From the outside, leaving made no sense at all. That's what made it unprecedented. This guitarist didn't get pushed out. He wasn't fired. He didn't self-destruct. He simply walked away. Calmly, deliberately. He explained it without drama. He was exhausted, creatively drained, tired of contributing without acknowledgement, tired of feeling invisible inside the loudest band in the world. For the Stones, this was unthinkable. No one had ever quit them voluntarily. The band prided itself on survival through chaos. People got removed. People burned out. But choosing to leave, that broke the mythology. Reactions inside the camp were mixed. Some felt betrayed. Others felt blindsided. A few understood even if they didn't agree. What mattered was the reality. One of the most gifted musicians ever to pass through the Rolling Stones had decided that staying cost too much. And just like that, the band was exposed again. Another guitarist gone. Another future uncertain. But this time, the next chapter would be even stranger. The Stones didn't announce auditions. They didn't post calls or make formal plans. Instead, they turned the studio itself into a testing ground. Anyone who stepped inside might be evaluated whether they realized it or not. It was an unusual approach, but a revealing one. Different guitarists came and went. Some famous, some experimental. Some stayed only long enough to realize the pace wasn't for them. Others lingered, sensing opportunity. What the Stones were really testing wasn't skill. It was compatibility. Could someone fit into the existing structure without challenging it? Could they enhance the music without shifting the balance of power? Could they disappear just enough when necessary? Then one guitarist did something unexpected. He didn't just play well, he connected. Not with the whole band, but with Keith. They jammed freely, shared instincts, found common ground musically and personally. For a moment, it felt organic, effortless, dangerous in the best way. Inside the studio, the chemistry was undeniable. And that's when the atmosphere changed. Because in the Rolling Stones, chemistry isn't just creative. It's political. He didn't arrive with expectations. No headlines, no mythology, just a guitar and a reputation for making records better without being seen. This guitarist wasn't chasing the spotlight, and that made him dangerous. From the first sessions, something clicked. His playing didn't compete. It complemented. He slipped between riffs, added texture where space existed, and knew exactly when to step forward and when to disappear. In the studio, songs began to breathe differently. Grooves tightened. Solos appeared effortlessly, as if they had always been there. Most importantly, he connected with Keith. They played without overthinking, shared references, finished each other's musical sentences. It felt natural in a way the band hadn't experienced since earlier days. For a brief moment, it seemed obvious this was the next chapter. But not everyone saw it that way. Because while the music was improving, something else was shifting too. The balance of influence, the rhythm of decision-making, the quiet center of gravity that had always held the band together. This guitarist wasn't just adding notes, he was adding possibility. And possibility inside a band like the Rolling Stones is complicated, because it invites change, and change invites questions about control. Behind the smiles and late-night jams, lines were being quietly redrawn. Who writes with whom? Who shapes the sound? Who belongs inside the inner circle? By the time the sessions progressed, the issue was no longer musical. It was existential. The Rolling Stones have always presented themselves as chaos, but internally, they run on instinct, sharpened by politics. Talent alone has never been enough. Timing matters. Image matters. Loyalty matters. And above all, cohesion matters not just on stage, but off it. This guitarist had done everything right musically, but socially, he didn't quite fit the mythology. He wasn't part of the old stories. He didn't share the same history, and perhaps most importantly, he wasn't invisible enough. There was concern, unspoken, but real, that his presence changed the chemistry too much. That the band's sound was drifting towards something more polished, more sophisticated, less dangerous in the traditional Stone sense. Another option quietly emerged. A guitarist who wasn't as technically dazzling, but who felt familiar. Someone who blended rather than challenged. Someone whose personality fits seamlessly into the band's identity. The decision didn't happen in one dramatic meeting. It happened gradually. Less studio time, fewer calls, a subtle cooling of momentum. The guitarist who once seemed inevitable now felt peripheral. His contributions remained on tape, but his future slipped away silently. In the end, the choice wasn't about who played best. It was about who preserved the structure. And structure, once threatened, always protects itself. Years later, the evidence remained. Not in interviews, not in official histories, but in the songs. Fans began to notice something strange. Certain tracks carried a different energy, solos that stood apart, guitar lines that felt more fluid, more expressive, more fearless than the band's later work. Those sounds weren't accidents. They belonged to the guitarist who left and the one who almost stayed. Some songs quietly disappeared from live shows. Others were altered beyond recognition. It was as if the band knew certain moments could never be recreated without the people who shaped them. Over time, listeners filled in the gaps. They traced the fingerprints, compared eras, asked uncomfortable questions, and slowly, the narrative cracked. The idea that the Stones' story flowed neatly from one guitarist to the next no longer held. There were missing chapters. Chapters defined by musicians who gave the band its greatest depth and then vanished from the spotlight. The truth was unavoidable. The Rolling Stones didn't just lose guitarists. They lost versions of themselves. And the music remembers what the official story chose to forget. Time has a way of undoing carefully managed narratives. Long after the tours end and the albums stop climbing charts, the music keeps speaking. And in the case of the Rolling Stones, it speaks louder than the version of history the band once preferred. Because no matter how rarely certain names were mentioned, listeners could hear the difference. They could hear when the guitar lines became more lyrical, when the songs breathed differently, when improvisation replaced repetition, and they could also hear when that magic quietly faded. The band moved on, successfully, powerfully, but something unmistakable was left behind. The guitarist who chose to leave proved that sometimes survival means walking away from the biggest stage in the world. The guitarist who nearly joined proved that talent alone doesn't guarantee a place in history. Both revealed the same truth. Inside legendary bands, music is only one part of the equation. Ego, control, image, legacy. Those forces shape outcomes as much as sound ever does. In the end, the Rolling Stones didn't erase these guitarists. They simply stopped highlighting them. And for years, that worked. Until fans listened closely, compared eras, asked why certain songs felt untouchable, why certain moments were never repeated live. The answers were never spoken clearly, but they were always there, hidden in the music itself. The Rolling Stones story isn't incomplete. It's selective. Between the familiar faces and celebrated chapters lies a quieter truth. Some of the band's greatest evolution came from musicians who didn't fit the long-term narrative. They arrived, changed everything, and then disappeared, not because they failed, but because they complicated the balance of power. One walked away to protect himself. Another was quietly sidelined to protect the structure. And yet, neither truly vanished. Their influence lives on in the records fans still argue about, revisit, and defend decades later, in the songs that sound different, in the moments that feel untamed. In the era many still call the band's creative peak, history may choose simplicity. Music rarely does. And sometimes, the most important figures in a legend are the ones the legend never quite knew how to explain. So let me ask you, who do you think was the most overlooked guitarist in the Rolling Stones' history? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy deep dives into rock history, hidden power struggles, and the stories bands don't always tell, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because the most interesting chapters of music history are often the ones written between the lines.